What do you want out of this podcast, listener? What do you want to gain from this?
Right, this has gone horribly. Welcome to another episode of 80% Mental, which is definitely the best sports psychology podcast made in an attic in Sheffield. I can say that, I think, with 100% confidence. I'm Dr. Pete Olusoga, and Hugh Gilmore's here as well. Hugh, how are you doing?
Pete, I'm great. I'm very excited today. I'm also amazed at some of the feedback we've been getting online from the listens from the first few episodes that have been released. It's absolutely immense.
It is. It's mind blowing. It's more than I would have expected. So thanks to everybody who's been sharing our episodes and listening. We're going to get straight into today's episode, and as usual, we're going to start with a question about sports psychology, and we're going to see if we can answer it in around about an hour or so. And this week's question is: how can I set goals that really stick? And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that most people are pretty crap at sticking to goals. I mean, I've got no evidence whatsoever for that statement, but it seems like it's about right. Have you got any goals, Hugh, that you've just sacked off completely?
I have set a number of goals. I did have a goal to build a stand-up paddleboard once, and then I just decided to buy one instead. But I also did have a goal once of trying to do a handstand on top of a skateboard. But I think the reason I didn't achieve that was because I didn't set the goal of learning to use a skateboard first.
Fair enough. I set a goal at the start of this year, and it was to read at least one chapter of at least one book every single day of the year. And I did it until the start of August, and I went away for a week. And the first day that I was away, I literally forgot that I was supposed to be doing it. And at that point, I've just sacked it off now.
My goodness.
It was good though. It was good when I was doing it. But the first day that I forgot, I was like, oh, I might as well not bother. And I think that's gonna be a theme that comes up in the rest of the episode as well. Luckily, though, we've got two fantastic sports psychologists with us today to help us figure out how to set goals that stick. So whether you're an athlete, a coach, a psych, or just someone who's trying to stick to their goals, hopefully we've got something useful for you today. So first, I want to introduce Hannah Brooks. Hannah is a chartered sport and exercise psychologist working for the English Institute of Sport and a number of other private clients as well. And Hannah, you're doing a PhD at Cardiff Met, is that right?
Yes, that is right.
Can you tell us a little bit about what that PhD is about?
Yes, I'm looking at psychosocial factors that might be important in the development of elite triathletes.
Okay, awesome. And I want to point out, full disclosure, Hannah is an ex-student of mine. Hannah was in my class when I was teaching on the MSc in sport and exercise psychology. I won't say how many years ago that was, partly because I can't actually remember, but it was a while ago anyway. So welcome to the show, Hannah.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
And we've also got Charlotte Hinchliffe, who is the performance psychologist for British Para Swimming, and is also completing a PhD in talent development at Leeds Becker. And Charlotte, you've been working in sports psych since 2013, is that right? About 7 years or so?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. So I completed my master's at the end of 2013 and went on to my stage 2 training then, and been doing a combination of applied work and research and teaching and lecturing in sports psych ever since, yeah.
Awesome. Well, welcome, Hannah and Charlotte. Really glad to have you guys here with us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
So we've got two guests with a load of experience, and then there's me and Hugh, who may or may not also bring something interesting. We'll have to wait and see. I want to start with the first question, and it might seem like an obvious one, but Charlotte, why do we bother to set goals?
So I think everyone sets some sort of goal on a probably daily basis, even if it's just to get up at a certain time or achieve a certain task in the day. That's kind of setting yourself a goal, and it's around giving yourself a bit of direction and purpose in what you're wanting to achieve. Every time you're setting out to achieve something, you're setting yourself a goal. But also know that goals kind of are good confidence boosters and good at motivating us and directing our efforts and helping us to focus in on certain things that are going to help us to get where we want to be, I guess.
So I'm curious, you guys obviously are sports psychs. Do you set goals yourself as well as with your clients?
I think, as Charlotte said, you sort of inherently, we're all setting goals on a daily basis, whatever we're doing, simple tasks or more complex tasks or work stuff, personal life. Certainly, I'd say it's something that I do genuinely try to do, try to practice what I preach a little bit. But I can absolutely resonate with what you guys were saying at the beginning about certainly having goals that you've set and achieved, and also that you've set and failed.
I'm currently trying to lose the lockdown stone, or the Corona stone, as people keep calling it, that I've managed to...
Oh, it's got a name, has it?
Well, I've heard it floating about, yeah. And I can certainly attest to that. I've been one of those that have definitely gained the Corona stone. So yeah, that's my current goal. When I got back from annual leave a couple of weeks ago, I was like, right, that's enough eating and drinking nice stuff for a while. Let's get that stone off again. So yeah, that's my current goal I'm working with.
Okay. So as sports psychs, you have a bit of an insight to this, not just with athletes, but with yourselves. Like, how is it goals actually work? There must be some sort of theory behind it, or approach that kind of underpins how you think about your goals and the elite athletes that you work with, their goals as well.
So in terms of, I guess, how goals work, I think it's around, like I said, providing a bit of focus in terms of giving you a bit of direction of what you're aiming for. And again, being a bit of a motivator, so giving you a kind of that overall thing of what you're aiming for. So we often talk about different types of goals having different functions. So you might have your big outcome, long-term goal, and then you might break that down into different objectives you're trying to achieve along the way. And then you might have some process goals around how you're actually going to go about doing that. And it's just a really useful way in terms of understanding how you want to achieve those big picture goals by using smaller goals to help you get there along the way as well.
And Hannah, have you any thoughts on that, like in terms of like the theory behind it and how it works and you piece it together? Is there anything that you think is a key feature that, I mean, it's very easy for psychologists to use big words like process and outcome and stuff like that. Like, for somebody who's maybe a little linguistically challenged like myself, how would you break this down to a coach?
I think looking at kind of the bigger picture of us as humans, the way I've been thinking about this is that as humans, we have this amazing ability to think and to control our actions and what we do and decide what goals we want to make. Some probably are decided for us by our physiology and a need to drink or sleep, but we also have an ability to choose what we want to do. And I think that's where this concept of goal setting becomes hugely important within the world of performance and our daily lives too. And I think probably what Charlotte's pulled out there is that we can sort of have this goal of, I want to hit this time or come in this position in this competition. But actually what we need to be able to do is to break it down into things that are within our control. And that's where the kind of process goals come in. A lot of the goal setting works come from the organizational psychology literature originally. I think Locke and Latham are the big names behind a lot of the goal setting research. And actually what they found is that setting really specific goals is really important, and setting goals that are fairly challenging to us are going to have the best kind of impact from a kind of motivational perspective, certainly. But equally, having goals that are achievable is super important too. If you constantly trying to achieve goals of these process goals, these controllable goals that are just you're not able to achieve, maybe you're not good enough at that moment in time, or you're not trained well enough for, then actually you might actually set yourself back by setting goals that are sort of not achievable. So making them difficult but achievable is also really important.
Yeah, it's interesting there that you said that goals can actually set you back, and I think this is one of the difficult things to explain within psychology, is that if you've got something that's strong medicine, it's also strong poison if it's used in the wrong way. Pete, I'm sure you've got some thoughts on this. You must know something about goals.
Well, just to pick up on what you guys have both said so far, so it seems like we all set goals, whether we're athletes, coaches, just anybody. Everybody sets goals, whether they're little things about getting up in the morning at a particular time, or whether it's achieving some long-term objective. Charlotte, you mentioned outcome goals, perhaps longer-term outcomes that we're looking for, and then there's process goals, which are the real nuts and bolts. And I like to break that down as thinking about, okay, well, the what, as in what is it that I'm trying to achieve, and the how. Well, how am I going to get there? and those process goals are all about the how. Hannah, you mentioned achievable goals, and I know that a lot of our listeners will have come across this idea of SMART goals, or SMARTS goals, or SMARTER goals, or whatever it is. There's like a million different acronyms, and everyone loves an acronym. But I just wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about that. So achievable is one of those guidelines for setting good goals. What are SMART goals, and how do they work?
Yeah, so depending which acronym you do decide to use, SMART goals or SMART, the acronym stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. So I think that captures some of the things we talked about already, with the sort of difficult or challenging but achievable and also specific nature of goals. But I think the other bits we probably haven't mentioned so much there are having something that you can measure, be that a time, a distance, a measurable outcome, or something that you measure more qualitatively through observation, and also having a bit of a time frame on it. If you don't put a deadline on it, then that's going to make it a bit more tricky to know what it is you're actually trying to achieve.
So when we set goals, they should be specific and measurable. There should be something that's realistic, achievable, something that we record, so we write it down somewhere, that helps as well, and something where there's a sort of time frame to that goal as well. So that's what SMART goals are. And like I say, most people I think will have probably come across SMART goals. What's the evidence that setting these types of goals and following those guidelines about making it, challenging but achievable, what's the evidence that setting goals actually helps me get where I want to?
Well, my understanding is that there's a fair bit of evidence behind the kind of specificity and the kind of level of challenge of goals. And also the fact that if you kind of announce it publicly that you're setting a specific goal, that you're more likely to achieve it. So that links in with the kind of recording down. Probably the one thought I've had when I was thinking about coming on to do this podcast was, are we very fixated on goal setting as almost like an outcome, rather than goal setting itself being this process and the benefits that you can potentially get from that? So as a coach, to sit down with an athlete to help them understand what it is they actually do need to do to achieve what they want to achieve in their sport, and getting to know themselves, their strengths, their weaknesses, where they're at right now, to help develop the coach-athlete relationship or the athlete-psychologist relationship. I think that for me, that's got to be a huge part of goal setting as a topic, if you like.
I've never really heard anyone put it like that before. People setting goals, the act of setting goals is the goal, as opposed to goal setting as a process. It's how you create performance. That's quite astute, actually. I think most coaches and most athletes probably think, oh, you set goals and then you've set goals, but that's not goal setting. Goal setting is how you build performance, and it's the process that you've elicited there. Charlotte, have you any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I agree. I think that's a really good way of putting it, and it's sometimes these things can become a bit of a tick box activity where it's like, have I done my goal setting? Have I done all these different things you've got to tick off? And actually it's the process behind that's the important thing, and engaging with that's going to get the results and ultimately affect performance. But also I think, just picking up on something else Hannah said there, the importance of not having goal setting done to you by a coach, like the coach setting your goals, but actually being involved in that process is really important. And in terms of getting buy-in for that process, really the athlete should be ideally driving that process, but at least be involved with it, and it be a collaborative process between coach and athlete, rather than coaches just setting goals and putting them onto athletes. I think that's really important.
Yeah, so goal setting is actually, done with somebody or for someone and not to them. One of the things that I'm very aware of is the fact that, kids are getting SMART goaled to death as soon as they hit about, 14 or so in the education system. It's like every teacher's SMART goaling them to get to death. And, how do you take, say, for example, a teacher who maybe is SMART goaling a kid to death? How would you get them to phrase what they're doing in such a way that there's buy-in and it's done for the kids and not to the kids?
So by being smart goal to deaf, do you mean that they're telling them to do smart goals, or just going on and on about what smart goaling is? Or
Well, no, I mean, like, I'll give you an example. Whenever I was delivering pre-made slides in a BTEC course, every slide or every lesson started with smart goals and finished with smart goals. It was just continually smart. Everything was delivered by smart goals. It was nearly as if you didn't learn unless somebody had set a smart goal. And I thought it was just like overuse of the technique. But then I realized that this is actually within the education system. It's become quite popular, is the use of smart goals. And I'm pretty sure some kids probably died from a smart goal. I've been in classrooms where, you know, people have died of boredom.
You're not selling yourself as a teacher here, Hugh.
In all seriousness, so smart goal to death is whenever you're constantly being hit with, let's put that into smart goal, let's put that into smart goal. And it's the teacher talking about the process to the child. I don't think it goes through. What's the difference between what a sports psych would do and a teacher who's just been told, here, have some smart?
I think like you just almost hit the nail on the head there. Like it's going through that process alongside them and really trying to get them to drive that process. I think with the SMARTER acronym, one of the words used for the E is exciting, like having goals that make you excited and that you want to be working towards. And I think if people are just dictated to around it and it's made into a really dry process, like have you made that specific tick? Have you made that measurable tick? Then that's not going to excite people. So, you know, relevant expertise can be brought in, but really the person that should be driving that is the person who's going to be doing all those processes that they need to do to achieve the goal.
It's really interesting listening to you both talk about this, because as far as I'm aware anyway, the evidence that directly links goal setting with performance outcomes is actually pretty sketchy. So, you know, just because we set goals doesn't necessarily mean our performance is going to get better. But what I'm hearing from you is that it's actually the process of goal setting that's the important thing here. And that comes right back to that first question that we asked, which was, you know, why do we set goals? And what I'm hearing is that it's the process that's important. It's that collaboration between athlete and coach or student and teacher. There's an element of self-discovery and self-learning when we're setting goals. It's perhaps something that's motivating or perhaps confidence boosting, and there's that kind of excitement around, you know, almost inspiring people to take action in the direction that they want to go in. So it's less about goal setting directly being beneficial for performance and more about goal setting having an impact on all of those other things that might lead athletes, students, whoever to push forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really good summary. I think the massive part that it has to do with self-awareness raising and creating space to have those conversations that maybe wouldn't happen if you didn't have time set aside to have those discussions around goal setting. So the athlete or whoever you're working with, by going through that process, understands more around what's realistic for them to be working towards, where should they be focusing in their attention on during this particular part in the season. And yeah, I think just creates a space to have those conversations and build that self-awareness.
Something just sparked in my head as Pete was talking then and Charlotte was talking then, was just around how it kind of links to the self-awareness piece there, of self-awareness of what someone needs to do, what's realistic, what their weaknesses are, and potentially also what their strengths are. And it might be that at different points in the year or different times in the season that you actually use goal setting to try and elicit slightly different outcomes almost, depending on as a coach or a psychologist what you feel that athlete almost needs to work towards or needs a little nudge on. Like, is it a generally increasing self-awareness, and how do I give a little nudge towards that? Or is it, I feel that the athlete needs to work on some weaknesses. It's the beginning of the season. We've got a great opportunity here to look at all the things that the athlete needs to improve on. Or is it actually, we're coming into competition, I really want this athlete to develop their confidence. So do I support them to elicit and create some goals around certain strengths and how they can maximize them, for example?
Yeah, so that's an interesting point there, like the self-awareness, but also the self-awareness of resources, what to draw on, so that the goal setting is not just the idea of, you know, let's set a plan in someone's head, but also it's an appraisal of who they are, what they've got, and then also what have they got access to. I'm not going to become the world's best handstander on a skateboard if I don't have access either to a handstand coach or somebody who can teach me how to skateboard. Not to mention the fact, have you seen the state of me? It's just not realistic.
So you're listening to 80% Mental, and we're here with Hannah Brooks and Charlotte Hinchliffe to see if we can figure out how to set goals that really stick. I only found this out fairly recently, that around 3 weeks into January is the day when most people give up on their New Year's resolutions. Everyone likes to set them, but we're pretty terrible at sticking to them. And I only found out recently that this has got a name. This is known as Quitters Day. And I guess the question is, what are we doing wrong? Because we've talked about SMART goals and the things that we should be doing to set goals that really stick. But if everybody quits after 3 weeks, why are we doing that? What are we doing wrong?
One of the other words I've heard used for the SMART acronym for the A is adjustable. And I think that may come into this here in the importance of adjusting your goals or regularly reviewing them and adjusting them where necessary, so that you're making sure that the goal you set is realistic. And if it's too easy, you might need to set a more difficult goal. But if it's too unachievable, you might need to adjust that goal. A lot of time people might set very black and white goals as well. And I think you mentioned, Pete, at the start that the first day that you didn't read that chapter of your book, you just gave up then, because it's a bit, well, what's the point now? I've kind of not done it for one day. So I think part of it is kind of recognizing that you're not necessarily going to be doing it 100% every day, and you've got to have some realism about that and be able to get yourself back on track if you do kind of dip off for that one day or something. So a lot of New Year's goals, I'm sure, around health stuff, so taking up more exercise or eating better or drinking less, and the first time we don't do that, we can be like, oh, what's the point? But it's about bringing yourself back on track maybe, and having a bit more realism about being human and not being able to do it 100% of the time.
Hannah, what do you think? Why do we fail at setting goals?
Yeah, I think Charlotte's made really, really good points there. Just thinking about something I think I mentioned earlier, just around humans being able to kind of act consciously and deliberately and having a choice in what we do. But I suppose we do also have these underlying physiological drives, such as being hungry or thirsty, needing sleep, etc. And I think as a bit of, and this links to being adaptable with our goals, a bit of it is about acknowledging those things that we maybe don't actually have conscious control over and how they might influence us. I think there's a study out there about judges making certain decisions about cases when they're hungry and versus when they're not, and how they're more likely to say that somebody is guilty if they're hungry. He was nodding, so I think I've retained that information correctly from when we spoke about it. And I think that's a great example of just those sort of underlying human physiological drives that we have and how they influence our behaviour. And it's exactly the same within goal setting. And that's where, that being adaptable, as Charlotte talked about, is hugely important.
We've picked out some of the kind of challenges people might have or the barriers that they might have to achieving their goals, and you can almost plan for how you're going to overcome them ahead of time, rather than being kind of caught off guard by them and then being like, oh, I've been knocked off my trajectory now, I might as well just give up. You can almost plan ahead and anticipate what you might do in that situation, which can also be helpful when you're going through the initial process of setting goals.
So what we're saying is that for people who are setting goals, it's not just about what it is they're trying to achieve. They need to think about all the things that might get in the way of those goals, and perhaps take proactive steps to think, okay, well, if that happens, well, here's how I'm going to get around that. Here's how I'm going to continue pursuing this goal that I've set. And Hannah, interestingly, you were talking about those physiological drives and that idea of self-control almost being a bit of a finite resource. So at times when we're tired or hungry, or, we've got a whole load of other stuff going on, actually, those are times when we might lack a little bit of self-control. And that's when we need to be particularly aware, I guess, that some of the goals that we might set might fall by the wayside. That's when the packet of hobnobs in the cupboard looks particularly appealing. Yeah. can you set too many goals?
I think you probably can. Yeah, I'm not sure if there's any kind of evidence to support this, but just from kind of anecdotal, kind of my own experience of working with people, when they have too many goals, you can sometimes have too many things to focus on, and that can be quite unhelpful actually, because if you think about your attention as a finite resource, if you're trying to split your attention across too many tasks, you'll be limited in your kind of ability to engage with all those different tasks. So yeah, from experience, setting 3-4 goals within a specific time period can be plenty. I guess a lot of it depends on the types of goals you're setting as well, and what they involve. I don't know if there's an easy answer to this, but yeah, I think you probably can definitely set too many goals.
Well, I guess if the point of them is to focus attention, then if we're setting too many and focusing attention on too many things, that can be more of a hindrance, more of a distraction. Hugh, what do you think about that?
I think it's interesting. There's a term within the research called goal blur. Now, I can't remember the paper I've read that from, but essentially the phrase, if everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority, rings true. And I think that's, for me, it goes back to the mechanistic idea of how goal setting works, is it drives your focus and attention to the thing that you've actually planned as important. It doesn't mean you're going to achieve it, but it means actually because you've planned it as important, it's more likely to get done. So yeah, I think there is something within the literature about setting too many goals. But I think, that also brings up like a different way of looking at setting goals in terms of the process. So the way I set goals, and I'm going to throw this out here, like I didn't come up with this myself. It was actually the simplest way that I've found to understand it. It comes from a book called Sporting Body, Sporting Mind by Seren Connolly, which I picked up in a charity shop for ADP. And like I still use that method with, world champions at the moment because it's so effective. But the critical thing that I thought from that method was that it asks you to set goals for your entire life, the next 5 years, the next 6 months, and then the next 3 months, with the idea being that you sort of plan out your entire life as it would be. And then once you've set loads of goals for each of those timeframes, you then prioritize those goals. And that then lets you sort of know what's achievable and how they all link together from short term to long term. And it's a really simplistic way of thinking about goals. But for me, it raises the big question of, look, you've got a limited amount of time. And if you've got goals in your personal life, those need to be as important as your sporting goals or your education goals or your relationship goals, or if you're on Instagram, your squad goals. But yeah, I don't know. That's a bit of a ramble on how I think about goals and prioritization, Pete. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think there's definitely a need to kind of prioritize. And I think I really liked what you brought in there around valuing your personal goals as much as your professional goals or your sporting goals, or whatever your line of work, so to speak, is. I was at a Derren Brown show a few years ago, and it was I think I was early in my training, so I'd done like my masters, and I was get taught all this stuff around goal setting and stuff. And he started the show by saying something like, I can't remember the exact words, but it was something about how goal setting can be really dangerous because it can make you so focused on one thing that you kind of forget to live. And you're so focused on achieving this one thing that you just forget to live your life. And that kind of resonated and rung true. And I was just like, that importance of having goals in all different areas of your life is really important for having a good balance, I think.
Yeah, it links to something that we've talked about in other episodes, and that's the idea of having values and identifying values rather than goals. And I think goals are important, but unless we connect with the meaning behind them, unless they're in the service of something that's bigger, then they're easy to just set aside if we mess them up or if we don't achieve them straight away. So goals are like a destination. So we might have a goal to get to America. So what do? We head west and eventually we get there. Identifying a value is more like a direction of travel. So, it might be really important for us to keep heading west. That's our value. And we can reach various destinations along the way. We can achieve milestones. But the important thing isn't the destination, it's the direction of travel. The important thing is that we keep moving that way. And it doesn't matter how much I move, whether it's a lot or a little bit, what's important is that I'm still moving. So in that case, goals are actually pretty much irrelevant. We put that in the context of sport or exercise even. Okay, well, what's a goal? It might be to get my body fat percentage down under 10% for an athlete, for example, or for the average person, okay, maybe I want to lose 5 pounds. But if I can identify the value behind that rather than just the goal, then it becomes more meaningful. We've identified why we're actually doing it. So the value might be that actually I want to live a really healthy lifestyle. Being healthy is really important to me. Now, if I eat a whole pack of Hobnobs, that might, or it might not even, stop me from achieving my goal. It certainly won't help though. And as in the case of my reading goal, I might just decide to give up because, I'm not going to get there. I'm not going to achieve it. I've missed that one day. But if it's the value that's important rather than the goal, if healthy living is the important thing, then I can notice that I'm not moving in that direction anymore. And I can reorient. I can recommit to start moving that way again. And again, the goal itself actually becomes completely irrelevant. What's important is committing to pursuing that value. And if I do that, then the goal I had in the first place, it'll come eventually. And it just kind of reminded me of what you guys were talking about there, about having or identifying those values in different domains of life, not just in sport, and not just at work, not just at home, but having all of those things and identifying what those values are. And just to kind of bring it back to where we started, which was the New Year's resolutions thing, a lot of people set New Year's resolutions in response to the excesses of November and December, and maybe September and October as well. So the goals that people set are, reactions to eating too much, drinking too much, partying too much, rather than in the pursuit of something that's meaningful to them. And I think that's why a lot of people perhaps come unstuck when they're setting New Year's resolutions. What do you guys think? You got any thoughts on that?
I feel inspired.
Good.
I'm a big believer in the importance of values as well. I think they're the kind of things that navigate the way you approach life, I think. And absolutely, if you can tie your goals into your values, I think that helps give it that greater purpose, which is massive, I think.
Hannah, any thoughts of value, something that you work with your athletes?
Yeah, certainly. I definitely echo everything Charlotte's just said. And probably linking back to something she said earlier about planning for the times when things might not go to plan. I think if you've got those really clear values, then you can plan in accordance with those values for what might go wrong in terms of getting to a goal, or what might go wrong and how am I going to respond to that in alignment with this value. And that can be a helpful way of addressing those potential challenges.
So, you've talked there, Hannah, about how if you align to your values, that'll sort of help you when you get off track. Have you, and Charlotte, to you as well, have you guys, got any strategies that you sort of plan in advance for setbacks and how to cope with those with the goal setting procedure? And is there anything in particular that you go through? What do you think, Hannah?
I think that, again, it comes back to having a really honest, open conversation and coming back to that idea of goal setting being a process, whereby if it's you're a coach or a psychologist or whoever you are setting goals with another person, ensuring that you're creating a place and a space where it's safe to talk about the things that might go wrong. And then when you do come up with those ideas, looking for an action, a controllable thing that you or they will do if and when that scenario occurs. So if, for example, you have given up drinking at New Year in your reactive goal to all those indulgences, then firstly, you could plan for the fact that you have some leftover alcohol from Christmas, and it could be that it gets to a Friday night and you're really craving a drink. You just think, oh, that'd be lovely. I'm back to work. I'm a bit stressed out again, and I really need a drink. So you can plan for that by potentially getting rid of that alcohol out of the house, not necessarily having one night binge to get rid of it all, but get rid of it all in a very safe way. Chuck it down the sink. And then you've planned and you've put an action in place for what happens if that scenario does occur. Or it might be a case that your mates invite you down the pub and your planned response is to go, actually, rather than going down the pub, do you fancy meeting, coming over to my place for lunch instead? And that's your planned response. So I think those are probably the key things that I'd probably think about. And then just one more thing's come into my brain as I'm speaking, just where you can potentially hold yourself to account in some way. As an athlete, maybe you could ask your coach to actually hold you accountable for doing what you said you're going to do, or check in with you, potentially just having that little bit of a nudge from an external source, or setting a reminder on your phone, having a screenshot on the back of your phone saying do not drink the alcohol in the cupboard. Just something to act as a little reminder might be a helpful thing to consider too.
That's pretty amazing, Hannah. I mean, you've outlined there like if then plans or what if plans that people will know from research here. Like, I think it's called implementation intentions within the literature. But the thing that just shocked me about your answer the most was, let's consider that we're going to fail, and actually the dynamic between the psych or the coach and the athlete, like we are setting a goal, and let's talk about what happens and when we'll fail, because I suppose that's a big thing. Like, coaches can buy in too much to setting a goal that it nearly feels like there's a failure of the goal, but then that failure is also a failure in itself, and says something about the athlete when actually it's part of the process. So being upfront and having that conversation of like, look, this failure is part of this. It says nothing about you, and we'll get to a point where we fail, and then we reassess, and being honest about that and start. Like, I don't think I've ever heard that before, but it seems like something that's very foundational in that relationship. So thanks very much for sharing that. Charlotte, goal setting, dealing with failure. We've just heard a bit from Hannah there about that and what we do with setbacks. Any views on this yourself? Any experiences?
I think a useful framework that can be used to help guide those conversations around maybe anticipating challenges is some of the models we know from behaviour change theory. One of the most comprehensive models out there at the moment, I believe, is the COM-B model by Susan Mickey and colleagues. And they outline kind of 6 key areas that influence our ability to change our behaviour or not. So you've got capability is the C. So whether we're physically and psychologically capable of doing that behaviour, that new behaviour we're trying to do. We've got opportunity, so whether we've got the physical opportunity in our environment and the social support in our environment to help us change that behaviour or achieve that goal. And motivation, so the reflexive and the reflective motivation, I think it is. So Hannah picked on the reflexive one there of the alcohol just being in reach and you're just reaching for it with a reflex on a Friday night after a hard week's work. And then reflectively, like whether you can plan for that maybe by getting rid of everything in advance, so you haven't got that temptation there. And I think those models of behaviour change can be really useful for maybe guiding some of those conversations. But equally, I think most people have a bit of an inkling about where their challenges might be and what's going to maybe throw them off course because from previous experience. So it can be a useful framework to use, but also, like Hannah said, just having those open conversations with the individual and creating that dialogue. The individual probably has quite a good insight into, for them, what their particular challenges might be.
That's excellent, Charlotte. I can't believe we've talked about this and not talked about the COM-B model. Pete, you're even older than me. And I'm curious, do you know what the COM-B model is? Have you heard of that?
Is that some sort of Hoover? Or like a washing machine or something? Is that?
This is the thing that freaks me out, is that when I did my master's, you had stages of change, Prochaska and De Clemente, but now all the kids are learning about COM-B. It's actually a much more useful way of thinking about behaviour change, but it seems to be, if you weren't educated at a certain time, you don't know about it. So I only found out about it through Megan Bentley, who's a nutritionist, who's doing her PhD in it. So thanks for sharing that with us, Charlotte. It's something that the listeners should definitely check out. Pete, how can we help our listeners, learn how to set goals?
Do you think I think we should set our listeners a goal? What do you think?
I think we should set our listeners a goal.
I think that's a good idea. I think an awesome goal for our listeners would be to, when they finish listening to this episode of the podcast, leave us a review.
Pete, you've done it wrong.
What have I done wrong?
You're telling them to leave us a review.
Oh, yeah, no, I am, aren't I?
We've got two experts on. Right. Okay. Hannah, Charlotte, we need you guys to speak in such a way that it will help and encourage our listeners to set the goal of leaving a review for the podcast. Go.
Hugh, I hate being put on the spot.
I've got a good way for you to think about this, right? I want you to imagine you're ringing up the listeners and you're going to be a sports psych who's going to leave a message in such a way that it helps them set the goal, okay? And you've only got one chance to leave a message, and they're going to listen to the message and see what happens, okay?
This is tough.
And the goal is to leave a review for the show.
Yeah.
After you, Hannah.
So I think I'd say something like this. Hi, listener. Thank you so much for tuning into the show, and hope you enjoyed it. But what would be fantastic would be if you have got an opinion on the show, if you might want to take a bit of time to think, oh, this is rubbish. I'm telling. Oh my God, it's hard. I can't do it.
We want to give you an opportunity to practice everything you've learned from today's amazing podcast on goal setting. Show us your best.
What do you want out of this podcast, listener? What do you want to gain from this? Is there a way that you can think of that would help Pete and Hugh to continue creating great podcasts for you and keep making better podcasts? And do you
use your feedback, but frame it as goals for Pete and Hugh?
Right, this has gone horribly.
This is so hard.
This hasn't gone horribly because our listeners have now learned that it is absolutely impossible to set a goal in a one-way conversation. It's a two-way conversation. You have to work with the person. And these guys, ringing them up, leaving a voicemail saying, leave a 5-star review and say something nice about Pete's beautiful voice. Them ringing up and saying, leave a 5-star review is not going to be effective. So I suppose let's just politely ask our listeners to leave a review then, Pete.
That is exactly what I'm going to do. If you're enjoying what you're listening to, don't forget to subscribe wherever it is that you listen to your podcasts. And we'd love to hear from you as well. So go to the website, www.80percentmental.com. 80% Mental is all words. And leave a comment after this episode. Or you could tweet us at EPM Podcast and let us know your goal setting successes or failures or any tips that maybe you might like to share. I definitely didn't have that written down. It was entirely off the cuff. So far, we've focused mainly on individuals. But let's say I'm coaching a team, or let's say I'm in charge of a group of people. How do I help that team to set appropriate goals? Because I might have a lot of different personalities, a lot of individuals who want to set individual goals. How do we navigate that? How do we set team goals? And I'll go to you first, Charlotte.
I think you've touched on a really good point there, that there are some potential differences with setting team goals to individual goals, and some other factors to consider. I think what's important with teams is to have a really good culture and really good vision of from a team where everyone's on the same page and know where they're heading as a team. Bringing it back to values again, Pete, the values that underpin that, but having team values. Those team values might be slightly different to your individual values, but there's normally ways that you can look to see how you can align your individual values to those team values. I think once you've got a good basis for that, then you can look to kind of set some real good team goals that don't kind of interfere too much at an individual level with athletes. I think laying the groundwork with that is kind of really important when it comes to a team setting.
The important thing is almost before you actually set the goal, it's about developing relationships and strong ties within the team, and absolutely that might well relate to the values that team holds. And once you've understood the people in front of you and they've understood each other, then that sets you up really well to set some really congruent goals for the team holistically and the individuals within the team.
Hugh, what about you? Your kind of practical experiences as like, what are your thoughts on all of this?
I think that's a very good consideration that's been put forward there is, what is the groundwork that needs to be there before you plant your goals? You can't just go into a goal setting thing without having those relationships and the team dynamics well understood. And similarly, like as a psych, obviously you can't set a goal unless you've got a relationship with an athlete, which again has come across. So there's a lot in that. But what I'm curious of is, we've heard of the term shared mental model, the idea that we all have created the same plan or the same idea, and it's normally used around team processes or game plans, that type of thing. I'm curious of Hannah's and Charlotte's views on like what's the difference, or is a shared mental model just the same as a goal, or what's their opinions on that? Because right now I'm confused. I don't know if I can tell the difference between the two. So, I mean, Hannah, have you any thoughts there? Like, is a shared mental model different from a team goal? Any thoughts on that? Or is this just like an example of psychs creating, more magical terms to confuse us all?
I think this is a great question. Goal setting can be the same as a shared mental model, this shared understanding of what's going on and what we're trying to achieve as a team. I think both require a clear purpose, a clear understanding of how to operate and the behaviours that align with that purpose, and both require role clarity for individuals. I wondered if the kind of motivational aspect of goal setting sits slightly differently to the shared mental model. And I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on this. For example, like in the shared mental model, with that term, are you just saying we understand what we're all trying to do? Whereas with the goal setting, are you saying we all understand and we're all working towards something within that? What do you think, Hugh?
I think that you have successfully rebutted a question with a question, Hannah, and therefore I have nothing left to do other than to throw that question on top of Charlotte. Is team goal setting just another term for shared mental model?
I have no idea.
I just had one thought, which again might be completely wrong and need to be deleted from this podcast. But does goal setting lead to a shared mental model? Is goal setting the process and shared mental model the outcome? I don't know. But I just suddenly had that thought.
So this is one for our listeners. Maybe if any of our experts and want to give us a reply on Twitter at EPM Podcast, that will be great, because we're all sat here a bit confused. Unless, of course, Pete, you have the answer.
Well, I was just going to say it depends on what we're defining as a shared mental model, isn't it? If it's the team having a unified view of who they are as a team and what they are about and the direction that they're going in, if that's what we mean by a shared mental model, and I think Hannah's hit on an important point there, that maybe actually goal setting is the process by which we achieve that. And again, it might, as we talked about earlier, it might not just be the idea of if you do goal setting, then that's the outcome. But it's the process of going through that. It's the shared discussions. It's the shared understanding and the self-discovery of the team and who they are and kind of what they want that perhaps leads to them developing that shared mental model. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Well, we'll just take that as the answer then. Okay. So what I wanted to get to was some kind of practical tips here, because yes, there's all of these things that we need to take into consideration when we're setting goals with a team. But okay, as an athlete or maybe even as a coach, what can I actually do to help the team set those team goals? How do we actually do that? And maybe tips for psychs as well. How do we get to the point where we're actually creating this I've forgotten words. I don't know any words anymore. How do we get to the point where we are able to actually set good team goals? Anyone? Hannah?
Good question. And I'd say, firstly, having everyone together and involved, either virtually at the minute in the world we live, or in person. I think having everybody involved in the process is really key, and having everyone's feeling like their opinion and their perspective is valued in that room. So I think that's the first step, simple as it sounds. Again, I think we've already spoken about having opportunities to get to know each other and really understand the individuals in the room. And then I think just giving time. Don't try and set team goals in half an hour. Give it 3 hours, 4 hours if you need. Make a day of it. Make a camp of it. Really give the athletes or whoever it is you're working with time to really, really think about what it is that's meaningful to them and what aligns with their values as a team. What's the goal that everybody will buy into, everybody agrees on? Allow there to be debate about that if necessary. That's part of that process. Really, really look underneath that then to go, okay, so how are we going to do this? Back to what you said right at the beginning, Pete, the what and the how. What do we want to achieve and how are we going to do that? And agree on individual and collective ways of working, and then look for ways to hold each other accountable to that through the season and really put those things in place. And as a coach or a teacher or a leader or captain, potentially a captain or a leadership group within that team, find a way to hold each other accountable to sticking to what they've said they're going to do. Those would be probably my main thoughts.
I think the thing that you said that I guess basically everybody who's listening to this will identify with is that if you're in any sort of organization whatsoever, you can't tell people what their values are, or you can't tell people what their goals should be. And I guess that's kind of the theme of what we're talking about today. You know, those goals and values as a team have to come from the bottom up. And, you know, you just said there about making sure that everybody's involved, make sure that everybody has their opinion. It can't be a top-down process. It's got to come from the ground up. Charlotte, what are your thoughts on this and your experience of working with athletes and teams?
I absolutely agree with everything Hannah said, and I think Pete, you've picked out the key point. And there, you know, everyone's got to be involved. Everyone's got to have their voice heard, and that's where you'll get the best results.
Go on, Hannah.
Just one thought as Charlotte was speaking then that popped into my mind is if you have got some more dominant characters, have a strategy to manage who talks and how much people talk. So, for example, I've heard of a group of athletes all being given a bunch of like poker chips, and within the course of that session, they've all got to use all their poker chips. And if you use them all really quickly, that's it, you're done. You can't say anything else. And if you're a quiet one who might sit at the back, you have to use your chips. So that's just one idea, but there's probably hundreds of other better things out there that you could do to just encourage people who are quiet to speak up and people who are maybe a bit more dominant to kind of not
to shut up.
Over kind of take Yep, just trying to find a more polite way of putting it, but that's pretty much it.
Hugh, what do you think? Because I think we've covered all of the questions that we wanted to cover, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's been definitely an interesting podcast, and it's opened my eyes maybe from a few things for me to brush up on. I think what stands out really is actually incorporating failure within the process as a normal aspect. But I can't think of any more questions from today, other than I'd like to ask our listeners the questions of how did it feel when you hit the 5-star button on the review, because it feels good for us. We hope it felt good for you too.
So we've discussed quite a bit today, and I'd like to just ask both of our guests, Charlotte and Hannah, what are your key takeaways for our listeners when it comes to setting effective goals that really stick? Charlotte, let's start with you.
I think it's definitely around if you're working with someone to involve them in the process and really help get them to drive it, tying them into your values. Definitely really key if you're working at a team level, team values, and if you're working at an individual level, your own individual values.
And Hannah, what about you? Key takeaways for our listeners. How do we set goals that really stick?
I'd agree with all the things Charlotte said. So try not to completely copy everything she said word for word there. Certainly kind of involving the other person in that process is absolutely key. And I think just the word process has really struck me today, and the process of goal setting and the conversations that surround it, and just how valuable they can be and how important they can be. And absolutely preparing for the things that might go wrong. As much as we sometimes don't want to talk about that, that's really important and can be really beneficial. And then I'd say finally, the importance of actually reviewing the goals and how things are going, and finding ways to, or finding time points at which you are going to review them, and how are you going to do that, identifying what success would look like and how you'll know if you have been successful in achieving the goal you've set.
Hugh, last word.
Well, I just wanted to thank you two guys for coming on, and say it's been an absolute pleasure. I know you're both working in elite sport within the UK Sport High Performance System and the EIS, and obviously working at Olympic and Paralympic level, and very, very busy. But if somebody wanted to get in touch with you guys, where would they do that? Hannah?
You can find me on Twitter at Han_Lucy_Brooks. Brooks does not have an E in it, as many people think. That's probably the best place to find me.
Yeah, same for me. I'm on Twitter. My handle is @SportsLikeHinch, and I believe my email address is probably out there on the World Wide Web as well.
We'll throw some links into the description for the episode with all of those details. So if you do want to find Charlotte or Hannah, you can just check the description for the episode and you'll find them there. So it just remains for me to thank both of our guests today. It's been a really insightful episode, and I think it's been a really useful one for our listeners. Lots of practical tips on how they can set goals that really stick. So thank you, Charlotte.
Thanks for having me, both of us. just thanking on behalf of us both there, Hannah.
And should we do that again? Do you want to do that again?
Yeah.
Right. So thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And thanks, Hannah.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome. So yeah, it has been a really useful episode. We've talked about why we set goals in the first place. We've talked about how goal setting actually works, and heard some really useful tips for making sure that we set goals that work for us. One thing that really stood out was the discussion around values. And one thing that I found really interesting to listen to was when we talked about the idea of preparing for failure when we're setting goals, but also talking about, okay, well, having a plan for what happens when we do fail. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do subscribe wherever it is you listen to your podcasts, and leave us a comment on the website or via Twitter @EPM Podcasts. I hope you've enjoyed what you've heard today, and I will see you next time. Well, I won't see you because it's a podcast.